Hello, everyone. I just wanted to share some thoughts on documents and records as data collection methods, and also some recent experience I've had with these types of methods, things to be aware of as social science researchers. Documents, records are often used in qualitative studies, but there's a difference between them, and it's important to understand the difference. Documents can be anything from, well, I'm sitting here in a hotel room in Sheraton, Dallas. I'm looking at the food and drink menu. This is a document. Notes I may take, field notes are documents. Other examples of documents would be notes you may take in classes. People sometimes maintain journals. It's very common these days on the internet. I think they call them blogs. Those are documents as well. Photographs are documents. Newspapers, documents. Records, very similar but have a slightly different purpose. A record is meant to show evidence of some type of event, transaction, or meaning. I have my driver's license on me. That's a record. A marriage license, showing signs of something that took place, a marriage. That is a record. Transcripts of court cases, court documents, filings, court decisions, judges' decisions. Those are records as well. Your student transcript is a record. It shows something formal that took place. It's evidence of something that happened. So there's a difference between documents and records. Important to keep that in mind. Look, I've been thinking about this lately. I've been doing recently some genealogical research. I have an aunt, Catherine. She was born in 1900, died in 1987. And some research on her and her husband, Paul. This is a very, very interesting case, and it reminds me of some of the things we need to be careful of in terms of analyzing or interpreting, perhaps, documents, records, etc. Her husband, Paul, was born in Königsberg, East Prussia, which is now Kaliningrad, part of Russia. At the time, though, it was part of the German Empire, East Prussia. Königsberg. He was born in 1886, died in 1952. I never knew him. But I've been trying to do some research on him because he has such a fascinating background. Apparently born in 1886 in Germany. He was a baron. He came to the United States around 1910. Started his own, he was an accountant, started his own accounting company. Branched it out into many different offices. And during the course of his life, served on the board of about 20 different companies near where I grew up. A very fascinating man, very interesting background. Some of it was rather mysterious, though. Don't know much about his family. Know the names of his parents. Don't know what happened to them. Don't know if he had any siblings. One of the things that's very unusual is when he left Germany, he got a divorce from his first wife before he married Aunt Kay. Aunt Kay, I call her Catherine. And left behind an ex-wife and a daughter in Germany. I think probably in the Berlin area. Apparently no contact with them, at least none that I know of, after he came to the U.S. around 1910. What's interesting, I finally went, when I was home a couple of weeks ago, went to the library and found a microfilm from when he died. It was died on December 25, Christmas Day, 1952. And looking for his obituary. And this is really interesting. If someone hadn't known that he was a very prestigious, wealthy individual, prominent businessman, they might have just gone to the obituaries. because his obit wasn't in the obituaries. Because he was such a prominent individual, his obit was in as a news article in the local news section. It wasn't actually in the obituaries. So somebody not knowing that might have just gone to the obit section and would have missed it entirely. That's an interesting thing about documents and records. They sometimes aren't where we think they are. Another interesting feature of the obit was reading it. It talked about where he went to school as an undergrad, that he went to medical school, Heidelberg University, but left medical school, wanted to pursue a career in business instead. Didn't say anything about an ex-wife or a daughter. Didn't even mention them. Now that could be for several reasons. It's safe to assume that Aunt Kay wrote the obituary right after he died in December 1952. He would have been 66 years old, by the way. Safe to assume that she wrote it. Why was there no mention of an ex-wife or even a daughter? You would think, even after a divorce, a person would want known that they'd had a child. I spoke with my mother about this when I was at home, because she didn't know Paul, but she did work with Aunt Kay. She knew Aunt Kay. She started working with her in 1954, 55, just a couple of years after Paul died. She'd known her for a long time. My mother suspected that perhaps it was because he was divorced. He didn't want, it was something that he didn't share with people, didn't want known. Keep in mind, this is early 20th century. Society was still very conservative, and many social circles, especially conservative circles, there were assumptions, biases against people who had been divorced. And my mother suspected that it was something that wasn't widely known, and that it wasn't mentioned because he probably thought it might have been harmful business. I don't know. Another theory, this is my own, is that perhaps my aunt was concerned about a daughter showing up and claiming some of the inheritance. He was a very wealthy, successful individual, substantial inheritance. And she might have been a little worried about somebody showing up, trying to lay claim to it. Although, if his daughter continued to live in Germany, especially Berlin, it's questionable whether she would have known at all about his death, particularly if she had no contact with him. Also, according to what I do know, the family lived in Berlin. I'm not sure which section it was. I have a street address from a 1910 city directory, but I'm not sure. I haven't done enough research to find out whether, after the war, that address fell within the American sector, the British sector, or the Soviet sector, in which case it wouldn't have mattered what they put in the newspaper. The Iron Curtain was down. Questionable at all whether they even survived World War II. Germany was decimated by the end of the war, and Berlin in particular looked like a city that had just been, it looked almost like Hiroshima in many ways. The massive fire bombings by British and American air forces. So it's an open question whether she even survived. But no way of knowing. There are some historical sites, and I think I have some clues going on, but I bring this up because it's a fascinating question that goes to documents and records. Okay, an obituary is a record. It's meant to provide evidence of something happening, a person's death, major things in their life. But even records can omit information, and they can be misleading. Another example, transcripts of meetings. You've been to a meeting before, oftentimes in business, academia. Somebody takes minutes of the meetings. They write down what happened. Oftentimes they may not reflect the actual discussions that took place in the meeting. I remember doing a study years ago, case study on integration at a small college in Virginia. Because it was a private institution, I had to get the permission of the president to access the Board of Trustees minutes. Very graciously allowed me to do so. And I was thinking, what kind of interesting discussions am I going to come up with or find when the 1960s meeting, when they decided to integrate from going all white to opening their doors. It was just a passage or two, a couple sentences in the Board of Trustees minutes discussed integration. The board voted unanimously to admit black students the following academic year. That's it. Who knows what happened at that meeting? And because this meeting took place 50 years ago, over 50 years ago, all the people at that meeting are gone. They're all dead. At best, other than the minutes, we might have secondary sources, but of course, those are suspect. Secondary sources, by the way, would be people who knew people at the meeting. For example, wives, friends, children of the trustees who were there, who could provide a second-hand account. Those are secondary sources. Certainly they are not preferable to primary sources. That's really what we want to emphasize. So there's no telling what happened at the meeting. It could have been a very simple meeting where everyone just agreed unanimously, this is the right thing to do, economically, morally. On the other hand, it could have been a huge discussion, people throwing chairs at each other. I doubt that, but who knows? But it brings us back to the circle around to the obituary, again, which is a record, and how it omitted some really important information, particularly on also even the fates of his parents. It mentioned that he was the son of, I think the names were Julius and Bertha, but it doesn't mention whether they survived him, whether they preceded him in death, which leads one to suspect that maybe there was no contact with his family at all. We can only speculate. But that is the nature of documents, records, qualitative research. We have to be careful when we look at something, not just for what is there, but just as important, we have to pay attention to what isn't there and the story that might tell. At any rate, some interesting reflections on qualitative research, historical research, documents, records, and how we look at them, have to look at them critically. Let's see, as usual, I'll be around. If you have any questions, get in touch with me. You know where to reach me. Bye.